everybody. Welcome once again to the Winning Digital Customers Show. I am Howard Tiersky, and Saturday is a holiday. Did you know that? This coming Saturday, we've had a lot of holidays lately. We had Mother's Day, we had Earth Day, and of course, we had May 4th. May the 4th be with you. But this Saturday, we have Armed Services Day, a day where we take time out to appreciate and respect, at least here in the U.S., I should say. It's a holiday in the U.S. I don't know if you're listening from the U.S. or not, but here in the U.S., it is Armed Services Day, a day where we take a moment to appreciate what it is that the U.S. military does for us. And of course, we have much to be appreciative for from the U.S. military, the way that they protect and defend our country, both here and abroad, the way they help support democratic interests around the world. And most recently during COVID, they've been a key partner with other organizations of government and pharmaceutical companies to getting vaccines out. I actually brought my son for his vaccination to a giant tent that the Army had set up outside MetLife Stadium, where the Jets and the Giants play, to do vaccinations, and they vaccinated thousands and thousands of people there. I believe they still are. So we got at least my son's vaccine from the U.S. military. So much to be thankful for. Today, I want to focus our discussion on an area of gratitude that we should probably have for the U.S. military that may not be the first thing that we think about when we think about all the things to thank the military for. Because in addition to our freedoms and all of these other things, the military has been a major force behind what we do in digital. I dare say we probably would not have the digital world that we have today if it were not for the U.S. military. So you probably aren't thinking of them when you call an Uber. You probably aren't thinking of them when you tell Alexa to reorder detergent, or when you when you upload something to Snapchat. But in fact, many of the technologies that are foundational to our digital world came from or were massively moved forward by and funded by the military. So let's just look at a couple of examples, and that's really what I wanted to do today. So let's start with transistors. Back around 1947, 48, something like that, the transistor was originally invented at Bell Labs. And it wasn't necessarily invented for military purposes. It came out of the research and development at Bell Labs. But one of the first briefings they had, even before they announced the transistor publicly, was with the U.S. military. And subsequent to its initial sort of invention as a purely scientific curiosity that you could use electricity to turn switches on and off, that the government and the U.S. government and the military branches, the Army and the Air Force and the Navy, started investing heavily in the purchase of transistors and in the continued development of this technology to support weapons systems. And if you fast forward about another 10 years or so, you have the development of the silicon transistor, and which, of course, leads us down a curve of continuing to pack more and more and more silicon transistors into a tighter and tighter space, which is essentially what today's microchip is. And of course, we all know that that is core to just about everything, right? Your phone runs microchips, your computers run microchips, the servers that run the digital capabilities we have in the cloud, obviously the microchip and the silicon transistor, which is the core of the microchip, similarly essential to everything that we do in the digital world. And again, it was the funding of the U.S. military for companies such as Texas Instruments and Bell Labs and spin-offs of those companies like Fairchild that really provided the funding to massively and accelerate the speed with which the science could evolve and create microchips that went from just a proof of concept in a laboratory to something that could be commercialized. And the military continued to press for faster and faster microchips because they wanted to, and more and more reliable microchips, because of course they wanted to put them in weapon systems. NASA came along around the same time, and with the moonshot, the Apollo program needed different types of circuits, different types of transistors, and the ability to program them so that they could do things like the complex math associated with sending a man to the moon. Now, sometimes today people joke that the amount of transistors, the amount of computing power that sent a man to the moon is less than you find in a PlayStation today. And while that's true, it certainly is a heck of a lot of computing power compared to the original transistor when it was initially created at Bell Labs. And all you could do was take one transistor circuit and turn it on and off with electricity, right? And of course, now you multiply that times millions and millions and millions and millions to create the kinds of chips that we have today. So you would not have your PlayStation if it were not for massive investment. And the budget of the U.S. military is, I think this year it was something in the neighborhood of $750 billion a year. So no company has that kind of money. And of course, it doesn't all go into research and development. It goes into many things, and paying for salaries and paying for army bases and all kinds of things. But a significant focus of military spending, without a doubt, is on how they can use technology to create, let's be honest, better and better weapons. And not just weapons, capabilities that allow them to detect what's going on, around the world, to potentially communicate. And we're going to talk about some of these examples in the next few minutes. But if you think about all the different things that the military tries to do to be successful, navigating ships at sea, targeting weapons, keeping soldiers in communication with each other, complex calculations, these are all things that the military has had the money and has spent money to build these types of systems. And of course, then the civilian applications of these same technologies have benefited us in so many other ways. So of course, the microchip led to the invention of the computer. Now, the original invention of the computer, those who've taken a computer science class probably know, was invented by Charles Babbage in the 19th century, but that was just conceptual. He never actually built a computer. He just had the idea for what a computer could do. But the original computers, the first computers that were actually built out of transistors, were funded by the U.S. military, and they all have all kinds of different acronyms. And ENIAC, I believe, was one of the first ones, and there were 5 or 6 giant computers. Now, when we say giant, not giant by modern standards in terms of their processing power, but giant in terms of the physical space that they took up, which the military was using for various kinds of calculations, whether it was decrypting enemy codes. There's a great movie, blanking on the name, but about how during World War II, computers were used for decrypting, Nazi encrypted messages that they would intercept. So for a variety of applications, including these types of calculations, the military funded the creation of the first computers. And of course, like anything in technology, so much of the money goes into the first of anything, figuring out how to build it, figuring out how to make it work. And then over time, banks and ultimately many other, in fact, all other businesses wound up benefiting from the pioneering of computing. That, again, it wasn't necessarily the military that was actually doing the development, but they were driving the requirements, they were driving the need, and they were providing the funding. So in addition to computers, cell phones, the cellular technology that we use today, or at least I should say the original versions of the cellular technology, were developed by the military to be used for soldier communications on the battlefield. And during World War II, Motorola produced mobile telephones for the U.S. Army. Think about that. During World War II, you're talking about in the 40s. Cellular technology, of course, a much earlier generation of cellular technology was being used, which eventually evolved to become the kinds of cellular capabilities. An Army team could set up a cell tower, like a very quick, field remote cell tower on a battlefield. And then soldiers, or I'm sure they didn't give one to every soldier, but key people that needed to communicate with each other could use that technology as a wireless means of communicating. And I don't know, I remember watching MASH years ago, and they would they'd have that green metal box, and there'd be somebody with the phone, the general, and they might have to turn a crank to get the power. But they were communicating wirelessly. And in many cases, of course, prior to that, they had radio signals, but cellular communication, of course, has many advantages for military purposes. Instead of broadcasting the same thing across to everybody, you're able to have a point-to-point communication, which naturally is more beneficial during a battle where you're concerned about others hearing your conversations, et cetera. So cell technology, another key component to what we have today in terms of our mobile digital world. So yet another brick in the digital wall that we have a debt to the world of the U.S. military. So, and of course, many people know that the internet itself was originally developed in the late 60s and early 70s by, you had the internet, which came together 2 initial networks, but it was, ARPANET, which was the sort of early military. It was basically a way of connecting together the military branches with academic institutions that were doing research. So again, it was the military driving the need for this type of standard connectivity for military projects, and of course other academic projects as well, which ultimately evolved into the commercial internet that we know today. So you can see increasingly, if you look at all these components, how, man, the debt of gratitude that we have to the military, and the funding, and the thinking, and the vision the military had, because it's not just money, it's someone coming forth and saying, hey, we need to be able to do this. And I want you, they would seek out scientists or companies that seem to have the latent technologies or skills, and they would say, we want to give you money and we want you to do this. Or they would go to a few of them and say, we want you to bid on the ability to do this. Another one is GPS. GPS, again, developed for the US military because they wanted to be able to navigate around on enemy terrain and be able to know exactly where they were at any given point in time. Obviously, you can imagine how important that is in battle. And furthermore, for the targeting of weapons. And if you have a missile, the ability to make sure that you can target that accurately. So that was developed originally for military use. And the military actually put, I think it was 20 satellites in orbit to form the initial global positioning. The G, of course, in GPS stands for global. The initial set of satellites that provides global positioning capabilities. And I'm sure now there are many more satellites that are doing that. But the initial set of satellites that did that was funded by, designed in conjunction with private enterprise, but created and driven by the US military. And of course, today, those satellites are critical to so many capabilities. Basic GPS car navigation, which frankly, I'd be probably lost in the middle of a forest somewhere right now if I didn't have GPS in my car. But in addition to that, of course, it's key to so many capabilities that we have on our phones that use our location, calling an Uber, finding the closest Domino's pizza place near you at any given point in time. Clearly, we all know the GPS capability of our mobile devices provides key functionality that we rely on for so many different things. Shall we keep going? I mentioned this in the context of GPS, but the military also drove the creation and the possibility of satellites. Of course, the US government has NASA as well, which is not exactly the military, but let's kind of lump all that in together. US government providing funding for these types of things. And NASA also provided funding for many of the things that we just talked about, whether it was microchips, computers, et cetera, and some of the other things that I'm going to talk about. And putting the whole technology around putting satellites in orbit and using them for multiple purposes, including communication satellites, GPS satellites, and of course, observational satellites. So the ability to have something like a Google Earth to be able to use satellite photography and then take that and provide an application that allows you, for example, to visualize what things look like in your neighborhood, to use for navigation purposes. It's used to provide mapping capability. So when a new road is created, one way that the mapping systems know is data from satellites and a wide range of other applications. And in fact, that kind of connects to another innovation, which is the digital camera. Because the whole idea of the digital vision sensors that are used, of course, we all know that the original cameras used film. And so they were not suitable for example, being used in a satellite, right? If you wanted to take an image from space and send it down to the Earth via satellite communication, you couldn't very well take a picture with film. What would you do with it then, right? You'd have to send the physical film so it could be developed. So there was a fundamental need in order for us to have, I can't think of a nice way of saying it, spy satellites, right? A way to see what other countries, what our enemies may be doing. And I'm sure you've many times seen, during the Cuban Missile Crisis and other times, that satellite imagery that is used to understand, what is happening from a military perspective. They needed a way of being able to take a picture in space and send it down to Earth. So that's what led to the development of the kinds of sensors, again, of course, much more primitive back then, that ultimately evolved to become today's digital camera sensors. Drones, another category which is not necessarily a huge part of a non-military world today, but we're going to see, I'm sure, I mean, we already see great examples of companies like Amazon thinking about how to use drones for delivery. And there are a variety of commercial, non-military applications of drones today in agriculture and other purposes and surveying. And I have absolutely no doubt that in the coming years, we're going to see more and more and more applications for drones so that they become kind of an integrated part of our digital world. And as we look to the future, the military is also one of the military's largest investment areas right now is around artificial intelligence. And again, you can imagine how valuable that is to the military to be able to play out simulations and war games or to analyze, for example, taking all that imagery that we get from satellites and applying computer vision and artificial intelligence to analyze and understand it. And so many more ways that AI can help keep us safe and plan when an attack is necessary, do the necessary work to make that as successful as possible, minimize the loss of human life, et cetera. So as we move forward in the world of artificial intelligence, while you may be most appreciative for artificial intelligence telling you on Amazon, people who bought this also buy that, or improving your Netflix recommendations, know that on a continuing and ongoing basis, the investment in artificial intelligence is, at least in part, coming from that vast $750 billion budget that the U.S. military has to spend every year. And of course, these are not the only categories. I think I've just gone through 7 or 8 or 9 things. And you can imagine if you add all these things together, from computers to cellular, mobile, data, telecommunications, to satellites, to digital photography. I mean, you start to realize that it's almost every aspect of what we think of as our digitized life today. And by the way, I haven't mentioned everything. For example, virtual reality and augmented reality is another thing. One of the major drivers behind the initial development of virtual reality was for war simulation and battle simulation. So soldiers could put on a helmet and experience what it'd be like to be on the battlefield in advance of that. Also for flight simulation. Now it's used, of course, for commercial aviation as well. But some of the initial virtual reality applications were created by the Air Force so that a fighter pilot could sit in a safe environment and simulate battle in an F-16 or whatever other kind of plane they were learning to fly, so that they would be less likely to die when doing that themselves and less likely to have accidents in the air, those types of things, and of course be more accurate. So, and we could probably go on and on. In fact, I welcome in the comments, I probably have missed a number of important things, although hopefully I've covered many of the most foundational. So absolutely, I'd love your feedback. Anything else that you're aware of, or any additional interesting tidbits or nuances that you want to add on top of these areas where we owe a debt of gratitude for our digital world today, to the U.S. military or to any military. If it's not the U.S. military, it's a military in some other country. That would be interesting to hear about as well. That's a little outside of the area that I know about, but certainly would be interested in knowing that. And I know, for example, that in addition to the work that's been done in the U.S., for one thing, some U.S. contracts have gone, of course, to companies from other countries. So the actual impact of U.S. military spending is not only in the U.S., and of course, militaries in other countries as well spend on these types of things. I know one of our clients, Airbus, for example, has done tremendous things in terms of satellites and military aviation and other things like that. So absolutely don't mean to suggest it's only limited to the U.S., but since it is the U.S. Armed Services Day coming up on Saturday, I wanted to at least take some time and acknowledge the debt of gratitude we owe to the U.S. military specifically. So hopefully that was interesting. It's interesting to me. And, we're so inclined as human beings, I think, to take things for granted. I mean, even just think about your cell phone. How often do you have a problem with your cell phone? You're trying to get through and a call gets dropped and you're like, you get all angry and frustrated at your cell phone. This crappy thing, why did you drop my call? Without sort of, instead of realizing it's actually kind of a miracle. You have this microprocessor you can stick in your pocket that is more powerful, as we said earlier, than the computers that sent a man to the moon. And it talks through this incredibly sophisticated network, sometimes through satellites or other means, to get your call from where you are to someplace around the world. And you're able to speak, and I can speak to someone in New York and have them hear my voice, microseconds later in Australia. I mean, it's really, truly a miracle. So, but the natural nature of the human mind, I think, is once you get acclimated to something, to just take it for granted and expect it. So, but hey, that's why we have holidays, right? Whether it's Mother's Day, to stop once a year and say, I really should take time out and appreciate my mother. She does things for me every day, all the time, and I probably don't appreciate her as much as I should. And I think that's why we have Armed Services Day, to stop and take a moment and say, you know what? We take for granted the fact that this U.S. military is doing so many things for us all the time, many things that we don't even realize they're doing on our behalf or have done in the past that we benefit from today. So, in the spirit of that, the true purpose of a holiday like Armed Services Day, I wanted to take a little time and remind everybody, or even educate everybody to the degree that you weren't aware. I know I wasn't aware of all of these things. I knew some of these things when we started to research it for this live cast. I learned about a few more. Like, I didn't know that digital cameras, for example, were funded by the military until my team researched it and provided me content for this live cast. So thanks to them. And thanks to you, of course, for listening and watching. As always, love to see your comments on this material. And I wish you a happy, great Armed Services Day this Saturday. Have a great one. Thanks. Bye.